Have you ever said something to your patient like, have you thought about losing weight? Or maybe you casually suggested, hey, just cut back on sweets, without realizing the lasting impact those words might have. The comments we make about weight or diet, even with good intentions, can shape a patient's relationship with food, sometimes for years. Today's episode might just change the way you speak to your patients forever. I'm Colleen, a PA, dietitian, and your nutrition mentor. Welcome to the Exam Room Nutrition Podcast, your guide to giving better nutrition advice. Joining me today is Tiffany Godwin, a registered dietitian and certified eating disorder specialist who has dedicated her career to helping people develop healthier, more compassionate relationships with food and their bodies. Tiffany is the founder of Attuned Nutrition Therapy in Texas, where she supports her clients through disordered eating recovery, intuitive eating, and sustainable health practices. With her authentic, humorous approach, sprinkled with wisdom gained from years of working in eating disorder treatment, Tiffany helps people find joy in nourishing themselves again. And in this episode, we're diving into how our everyday language around food and body image can unintentionally reinforce diet culture and lead to negative health outcomes. Tiffany reveals why leading with curiosity instead of assumptions can completely change the dynamics of your patient interactions. You'll hear her unforgettable analogies, including why human body diversity should be viewed similarly to how we approach the natural variety in dog breeds, and why restricting certain foods might actually worsen cravings and binge behaviors. Stick around until the end because we'll also tackle 3 tough questions your patients are asking. Number 1, why do I feel so guilty or shameful after eating certain foods? Number 2, what can I do when I feel out of control around food? And number 3, how do I respond when family or friends makes unwelcome comments about my body or eating habits? This conversation is a must listen if you've ever wondered how your well-intentioned words could be impacting your patient's long-term health. And if you're looking to better understand the patient experience with eating disorders, check out episode 41 after this one. You'll hear an inspiring story of a brave young woman's journey from silence and secrecy to restoration and recovery. It's an eye-opening episode that could transform the way you approach conversations about diet and weight. It's episode 41, and I'll link to it in the show notes. All right, now get comfy and enjoy my conversation with Tiffany. Tiffany, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. I can't wait to get into this topic. Welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited.
You guys know that I truly believe that how we say certain things and explain certain things to patients is almost even more important than what we're saying to our patients. So I can't wait to break this topic down with Tiffany, and she's going to really help us understand how the words that we use can affect our patients currently and long term. So Tiffany, I want to jump right into my first question, which is how exactly does diet culture impact us? And then how can we as providers avoid reinforcing its negative messaging?
Yeah, great question. Diet culture is pervasive. It is everywhere. No one is immune to it. When I say diet culture, I'm talking about losing weight is the most important thing to get healthy. And, us as clinicians and providers, we're human too. And so we also live in the same culture as our patients, as our clients. And so I think it's important to, one, just recognize ways in which diet culture affects you personally as a clinician, and also work through some of those things. Because I think as we talk to clients about, how to improve their health, diet culture can inadvertently kind of wiggle its way in.
So I just did a LinkedIn post because I saw a commercial on, I was watching some streaming program, and a commercial came up for one of these weight loss programs, one of those online things. And the comment was different patients or different people. And they said, my goal weight is, and it kind of like faded into what their goal weight is. But I loved it because it actually didn't say a number. It was like, my goal weight is to feel confident in shorts. And then the next one was like, my goal weight is to have energy to play with my kids. And I thought that was brilliant, number one, marketing, but also a really, really great message for those who are, watching that, is that hopefully as a society, which is going to take a long time, we're shifting away from that goal of weight loss and ideal body weight to more health and vitality and longevity. So I'm curious if you have any examples of like specific language and shifts in the words that we use that providers should use when discussing weight or health with their patients.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things for me as a dietitian and working in the eating disorder, disordered eating, slash mental health space, what's been really helpful for me is always to lead with curiosity and make sure we're not making assumptions about someone's habits or lifestyle based on anything, really the way they look, the way they talk, the way they, carry themselves. I think too, it's helpful to help our clients and patients to understand that the behaviors that we can change alone can help us be healthier, whether weight loss happens or not. And I think that can be discouraging because we do live in this diet culture space, but being more curious about the habits and behaviors that our clients have versus assuming that they're doing or not doing some things and then giving kind of blanketed advice. I've actually seen it cause harm for clients and patients. Again, working in the eating disorder space, I'm always very curious about what was that moment, that time where this kind of shifted? And a lot of times it is a conversation with someone in authority, whether that is a medical professional or a parent or, a teacher. If someone who's struggling with disordered eating, who is in a larger body, goes into the doctor to, make sure they're healthy and they get met with, hey, all these things look good, but you're overweight or you're obese. It can really set our people back because the emotion and the shame and the guilt that comes along with that. And it's just so discouraging for them. So I found when we lead with curiosity and we ask, what does your eating pattern look like? What are your habits? What does exercise look like for you? Do you do self-care activities or stress relieving activities? Because we know that all of those things have such a huge impact on our health and wellness.
I'm always so fascinated when I speak with dietitians who are in the eating disorder space, especially like in the adult world, because I live in pediatrics. And so it's often the springboard to a patient, who might develop an eating disorder later on in life. And so I'm very, very, very sensitive about the words that I use, comments about their body, discussing their weight in front of them. And if you've listened to the podcast for any amount of time, so many of my episodes give other ways and helpful tips on how to do this safely. So I'm not responsible for causing someone to go down that path of disordered eating. So I want to sit here for a minute because I think you've said something that's really interesting, that usually that point of takeoff for an eating disorder, disordered eating is something that someone in authority had said. And I firmly believe that it's usually in that pre-tween, teen environment or even early adulthood when we're really, really vulnerable and sensitive and just aware of our bodies. So how can we guide our families in creating those positive food environments that don't promote restrictive eating habits? Because yes, we want our kids and our families to eat fruits and eat vegetables and less fast food. So how do we give those quick tips of nutrition advice without pushing them toward disordered eating?
I have a client that I'm working with now who has been struggling. Their kiddo is in the obese category. And this kiddo is very, very active. They eat very balanced. They love fruits and vegetables. They do a great job at eating well and moving their body in a way that feels good. However, every time they go to their doctor, the issue of kiddo's weight comes up. And for mom, it's very disheartening because that was her experience in her life too. Some people are just bigger. And I don't know if you've ever seen the video called Poodle Science. It's a
No.
cute little illustrative video, but it basically makes the analogy or the comparison of, we know and accept that dogs are all different sizes and they all have different needs and they all have different strengths. And we accept that. However, when it comes to humans, it's different. It's like we all have to be the same shape, and size. And the evidence now is showing that if you uphold health promoting behaviors like eating balanced meals consistently, moving your body in a way that feels good, not drinking too much, not smoking, taking care of your stress. Those things, again, even if we're in the overweight or obese category, immensely help our health and improve it. But I think the biggest thing with kiddos is not restricting their choices, but providing choices and allowing them to discover what that feels like in their own body. Because when we are, don't eat too much sugar, don't eat too much candy, don't eat too much this, it's almost like we all have a little rebel in us that is stronger than we are sometimes. And that rebel spirit can kind of connect with food. And it doesn't allow them to discover and find out what their body needs and does well on, because everyone's body is different, even our kiddos.
I love that, the dog analogy. I've never thought of it that way, but you're so right. Like we look at a miniature poodle, and they're small, and then you can compare that to a mastiff and they're huge. And we think, oh, that's fine. They're just different dogs. And I think that actually clicks with a lot of people. I think that's a fantastic way to explain human bodies. But I want to sit here a minute because when you're in the office and maybe you are going over a growth chart with a family, and let's take that child who you're working with who is obese, so probably well above, the 99th percentile. If that child has always been there, and like you said, they're probably pretty healthy, how do you explain that to a child? Is it okay to say, hey, you're just in a bigger body? We don't want to use stigmatizing language. So what would be a way that you would explain just like you're healthy, but your body is just bigger? Is that an okay verbiage to use, or what would you suggest?
Yeah. So with this parent in particular, it has been helpful for her to just request that any weight discussions not be done with kiddo in the room, because it's coming from that authority figure, someone who we take what they say as, absolute truth. So I think that could be a good strategy of, not exposing them to that discussion. On the flip side, they're going to be exposed to that discussion because kids are kids and they say things and so also I think it is important to kind of call out the elephant in the room of like, hey, your body is a little bit different and let's kind of talk about why. And some of the cool things that this client actually brought up was their ancestral history of, where their family came from and why their body type is their body type based on how they survived, all of these years. So it's kind of like, hey, your body is different, but that doesn't mean that it's bad or that you're unhealthy. And I think too, empowering kiddos to accept their bodies at a young age can be so, so helpful because kiddos aren't born hating their bodies. Kiddos aren't born thinking that their bodies are wrong. They definitely get that from their life experiences. And I think it could be such a game changer in just telling kiddos there's nothing wrong with your body.
I have goosebumps. I love that. This is so important, I think, for anyone, especially in the pediatric space, but anyone, because a lot of our clients are parents too. And I've found that even at a young age, if the child just naturally is on the upper end of the curve and looks different from mom, the mom is the one who really, really struggles with having a larger child. So a lot of that actually comes from the parent. So I love that you encourage body positivity, but I want to bring it back to something that you said that I had never really thought of before, and that you had mentioned having a neutral view of your body. So not negative, and maybe they're not ready to be positive about their body, right? Because I mean, we're both women, like we both each probably have something we don't like about our body, whether it's your hair, your nose, your belly, your butt, it's just human nature. I find that interesting that you had mentioned a neutral approach. So can you explain what you meant there, what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, especially working in eating disorders, disordered eating, the idea of loving your body or even having a positive view of it can feel so out of reach for a lot of clients. It can be really distressing too. And I like to use like scales and visuals with clients a lot. I think it helps kind of connect the dots. But if you think about body image on a scale, 0 being I hate everything about myself today, and 10 being no one can say anything to make me feel bad about my body today. I love everything that's happening. There's a lot in between the two. And even getting a little bit closer to the other side can be helpful and healing that relationship and getting to a point where, they can work on the mental struggles that come along with it. But body neutrality can even look like, and I say this to some of my clients, and this is not a long-term solution, but it's almost like forgetting you have a body for just a little bit. Like, what does that feel like if we're not constantly thinking about the way our body feels and is perceived and how we show up in different spaces? And that can provide some relief for people just long enough that they can even see what it would look like to not live a life obsessed with your body.
I think that's so fascinating. And is this something that maybe can shift every day? I mean, personally, I'm just thinking about me. Like, there are some days when I'm like, I look so great in this outfit. And then some days I'm like, oh, okay, no, this is not happening. Do you see that with your patients? And is that okay?
Oh, yeah. I think it is something that's supposed to change. And I think for women, especially with the hormone shifts and the way our body naturally changes on a monthly basis, I think it's important for one to normalize that your body will change and the way you feel about your body will change. And what I help clients do a lot of times is, what are the things we can do on those days when you're at a 0? How can we still show respect and kindness to your body, even when you feel really terrible about it. And that might be something as simple as making sure you're eating all your meals in the day, because a lot of our clients struggle with, hey, I feel really bad in my body today, so I don't want to feed it.
Okay, I want to kind of change gears a little bit here. And I want to ask you questions that you actually submitted to me that are questions that I'm sure you get all the time. And so I want you to answer them as if maybe I'm the patient sitting across from you, because I know that my listeners are getting these questions too, and they're challenging to answer. So I'm just so interested to hear how you would answer a patient sitting across from you who's asking you these things. So my first question would be, why do I feel guilt, or why am I feeling so shameful or bad about myself after I eat certain foods?
I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with. And just because it's common doesn't mean it's okay. Unless you're stealing an ice cream cone out of a child's hand, there's no reason we should feel guilty about what we eat. Now, speaking of diet culture, it's everywhere. It's constantly in our faces everywhere we turn. And, going back to how we feel in our own body, if we feel that our body is wrong, then when we do something that is against what we've been told, we take personal responsibility for that. And that's a deep connection that is hard to break, but it can be done. There's no moral value to food. And food isn't black and white. It's not good or bad, healthy or unhealthy. Those terms are subjective, and nutrition is highly individualized. And so we can move away from shame and guilt into finding what aligns with your goals and your nutrition values to help kind of lessen that guilt and shame that might come up from eating those foods that aren't perfect, quote unquote.
Now, would a horrible response to someone who's saying, well, I feel really guilty after I eat chips or whatever, would a bad response be, well, just don't eat that stuff, or just you don't need to feel like that? Is there a better way to phrase, maybe something that they can do to shift that mindset?
Yeah, I think telling someone like, oh, don't feel that way, one, is invalidating for the client because, again, it's like they're expressing to you that they feel like they're doing something wrong. So I think it's important to address why do they think the reason is that they feel guilt and shame. A lot of people can connect the dots, and a lot of times it might be, well, when I was a kiddo, my, mom would only let me have one ice cream sandwich, right? And so if I had more than one ice cream sandwich, I would get in trouble, shame, guilt, right? So those things are very closely related. And I think it's also not helpful to tell people to not eat certain things, to not keep certain things in their home, because we're reinforcing the idea that this thing is bad and it must be avoided, or I'm bad for not having the strength or willpower to resist. And what we found with binge eating disorder, for example, binge eating disorder is really rooted in restriction. And so when we start to liberalize the food rules and the restriction, something happens called habituation. And it's essentially like being exposed to a stimuli over and over and over again until that stimuli is no longer as emotionally charged. And so I'll just use Oreos as an example. And when I work with clients, a lot of what I talk about is kind of pulling from my own personal experience as well, because I've had my own food journey and food struggles and, like most people who get into the helping profession. But Oreos was something for me that was really difficult to have in the house because if they're there, it's like they're screaming at me from the pantry. I know they're there. I know I can't have them. And I know that when I do eat them, I way overeat and I feel terrible physically, right? And so to practice, going from a place of I can't have these things in my house, it's very similar to like exposure therapy. It's having those things in the house and eating those things maybe every day for a week. You have 2 Oreos. And what happens is when we know it's available and we have access to it and we allow ourselves the permission to enjoy those foods, they really lose their power. And we can exist in the same space without feeling like, it's just this crazy monster that is looming over us.
I really love that you encourage us to lead with curiosity. I think that is so crucial and a really helpful part of patient care. Now, we're kind of talking about this when you're discussing Oreos, but the next question, and I think especially with the binge eating disorder, a lot of people struggle with feeling out of control around food, especially after they've restricted for so long. So what other strategies or how else can we help a patient who just feels so out of control?
I think that's where working with a dietitian can be really helpful because when we're recovering from anorexia, you go through a period of hyper metabolism and clients feel like they are a bottomless pit and it's so scary for them, especially in recovery from anorexia because their body is just screaming for any type of energy it can get. So the analogy I use with clients a lot is, you're in a swimming pool, you're underwater, you're holding your breath, you're trying to see how long you can hold your breath. Well, when you finally pop to the surface, you're not going to be breathing calmly and normally and stable. Like you're going to go because your body needs that air so desperately. And I think, in a similar way, a period of feeling very out of control around food after an extended period of restriction is just biology. And I think at that time, it's just important to validate, be curious, and provide support. So if someone's feeling very out of control around food, it might be helpful for them to work with the dietitian, come up with a plan so that we can start to address those out of control feelings, giving them some guidance so they feel like they're going in the right direction.
That analogy is so cool. You have the best analogies between the dog one and this swimming pool one. And I really like how it takes it out of context with food and health, because that's already complex. We've already complicated that. So everybody understands the analogy of being underwater too long. And the first thing your body wants when you come up is air. Makes complete sense. So I love that analogy. I think that can be used for a lot of our patients, at least to start that conversation. So my last question that is pretty common, whether you work in pediatrics or adults, or even you're just a human, is what do you do when friends or family keeps commenting on your body, whether it's you're too big or too small, or your eating choices? So maybe you go back for a second slice of cake and somebody just makes a flippant, oh, isn't that a lot of sugar or whatever? How should we help our patients kind of wrap their heads around this? And maybe even, are there any responses that you would suggest that they could say in reply to that person?
Yeah, so I'll share a little personal story and experience with this because, like I mentioned earlier, I myself have struggled with food and body and all these things. So, my dad essentially was a linebacker. Yep. My sister and I very much have, big, big, stocky shoulders. And, we're just bigger humans. And so, for us, growing up in this culture, and our mom was very, very much entrenched in diet culture, I think we got comments about our bodies a lot from the people that we love. And again, I think too, it's important to say that I truly believe that parents just want the best for their kiddos and they are doing the best they can with what they have and what they know. And so I very much believe that about our parents too. But, it was always like, you go and visit and it was, have you lost weight? Or you would go and visit and, oh, those pants are a little tight on you. Or, just like comments like that. It took me years to figure out how to navigate it. And I think for everyone, it's going to be different. But I think the biggest thing is finding that neutrality, acceptance within yourself and not trying to change everyone else's mind around you because it can be very exhausting. And you may not protect your own peace with what you've been doing. And so I think it's not so much like a rebuttal or trying to change someone's mind. I think it could be as simple as, let's say someone says, oh, it looks like you've lost weight. You could say something as simple as, thank you for the compliment. And I would like to talk about something else. It all depends on who you're talking to. If it's someone that you trust and you feel close with, you could share with them. Like, there's so much power in just being honest about your truth. You could just say, hey, I know you have good intentions in saying that, but for me right now, it's not helpful. So what else do you notice about me? Do you like my haircut? Do you like my makeup, my outfit? Different things like that. And because I do think a lot of times those comments come from a place of love and connection. And again, you don't know what you don't know. And some people may not realize the impact that those comments might have on people that they really love and care about.
Such a good response. I really, really like the fact that being a little bit vulnerable maybe and truthful. I think we as humans actually appreciate that. I don't really believe, especially if it's someone who is your family or, a loved one at a holiday party or something like that. I don't think that they have any intention to be malicious or harmful in their words. And sometimes people are just awkward and they don't know what else to say to you, or it's that awkward uncle who's just rude to everybody, right? So I don't think there is that evil intention for most people, but I love that you empowered that patient to step forward and say, hey, you know what? Like, I'm actually really struggling with something, this or my relationship with food or my body, and I'm working towards healing. Can we talk about something else? I feel like if I were the person who said, hey, hey, Tiffany, you look great. Have you lost weight? With a positive intention. And you said, hey, I appreciate that, but I'm actually working on something. Can we talk about something else? Me, I would be so grateful that you kind of called me out and said, like, this makes me uncomfortable. because I wouldn't want that for our friendship, right? So I think that's a great part of communication, is just being authentic and true to you. And I feel like as a society, if we were just more open about our struggles, we would relate and connect with people on such a deeper level.
Yes, absolutely.
The other thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is bringing it back to that Oreo story and like allowing yourself and almost like giving yourself permission to eat Oreos every night was part of your path towards healing. And I spoke with another dietitian. Actually, we were having a conversation on LinkedIn. I posted a picture of a slice of cake that I had during lunch. And people know that I'm a dietitian in my office. And I got comments was like, oh, the dietitian eating cake. And of course, they meant it just as humorous and funny. And I know all dietitians listen, you're like, oh my gosh, yes. Like everybody thinks that dietitians can't eat a piece of cake. But on my post, I was telling people like, you might not know why I'm eating cake. This might be a huge step to an eating disordered recovery, to allow myself the cake that maybe I've been avoiding for the last 2 or 3 years in the office. Now that I'm allowing my body that cake, that's a huge step forward to recovery, that making a comment like that might take me back, right? So we never know why people are eating the foods that they're eating. And so I really don't think it's anyone's place to make comments about the foods that they're eating. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I did spend time in higher level of care for eating disorders. And a saying we would say a lot is don't yuck my yum. Because a lot of times too, you could make comments about like, I hate olives, or how do you eat that? Things like that. That can be so difficult for people to hear because there's so much shame and guilt about food. Don't yuck my yum was kind of our quick way to squash any of that, because it's not necessarily like saying anything negative about their body or their food. But exactly like you were saying, you don't know what someone is struggling with. And I have some clients who are down to only eating 5 different foods. And if they're struggling every day just to nourish themselves with those 5 different foods, and then someone makes a comment about how odd their food combinations are, or why are you having a protein bar and a protein drink with your lunch? And those people are in a healing state. A healing state is a vulnerable state. So I always, always encourage people to not make comments about other people's food. And if you want to talk about food with someone, lead with curiosity. Same thing applies. If you connect with people by talking about food, I think that's difficult, especially, here in the South, in Texas, we love food and we love to connect over food. Just keep that in mind, that they may be struggling with something that we don't know and we can't see. And so if you want to connect with them, lead with curiosity and be compassionate.
What a great place to end our conversation, Tiffany. This has been such a rich and informative conversation. And I've just loved learning all of these tips from you, and your analogies are fantastic. So if people want to follow you and learn more about you, where can they connect with you?
Yeah, I'm most active on Instagram. My handle is at the Attuned RD, and my practice is Attuned Nutrition Therapy. We are based in Texas. We do take some insurance, which is wonderful. You can find me on my website at Attuned Nutrition.
So great. I highly recommend you go follow her. I've seen some of your reels and you put some great content out there. I'll link to all of that down in the show notes below. But Tiffany, thank you so much for the gift of your time and just sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you want more practical nutrition tips, the latest trends, and my favorite conversation starters delivered straight to your inbox, I've got just the thing for you. My free newsletter. It's packed with bite-sized insights that make giving nutrition advice easier and way more effective. Trust me, your patients and your busy schedule will thank you. You can sign up at examroomnutrition.com/sign up, or just click the link in the show notes. Well, that's all I've got for you today. So as always, let's continue to make our patients healthier, one exam room at a time. I'll see you next time.